it is finished. And I take that as a reminder to always, whatever you do, finish well. Yeah, finish well. So, hey, let's work hard for an hour here. Yes, hang in there. Let's finish well. We've got an important conversation to have as we begin to look at foundations to a legacy of faith. This would be part one, and then tomorrow morning we'll do part two. And what I have in mind here is basically the question, well, how do parents influence? This would be the nuts and bolts, the blocking and tackling of parenting. It's like these things need to be in place, and then we'll speak further. We'll build on that in terms of creating a legacy of faith. I think you'll see where I'm going with this in a moment. But in a previous life, I worked as an adolescent drug rehab counselor for some time, and I came across this, and I'm like, yes, that seems to fit well with the population I'm working with. How to raise a child to be a troubled, difficult, or otherwise rebellious teen. It's like, okay, begin with the end in mind. Well, you take an or under-involved parent, you throw in some negative peer pressure and some boredom, and you are likely to have a troubled teenager on your hands. Now, I want to be careful here. I'm not saying if you had a troubled teenager, then these things are true of you. But I am saying if these things are true, there's a very good chance that you're going to have a troubled teenager on your hands. You take an or under-involved parent, negative peer pressure, and boredom. That's putting it in simple terms. So what I'm saying to you is that our plan, our strategies need to address some of these concerns. Does that make sense to you? And I think I can show you how we're going to do that. So, number one, foundations to a legacy of faith. How do parents influence? Number one is emotional bonding. Most of you have probably heard this phrase, rules minus a relationship promotes rebellion. Rules plus a relationship promotes obedience. If you were to come walking by my house and you had Fido, your dog, with you, and I were to walk out to the curb, and as you came walking by, I was to say something like, Fido, sit, you would probably look at me like I was crazy. If I said, Fido, roll over, Fido would probably look at me like I was crazy, right? Because you know the obvious, that if I don't have a relationship, watch this, if I haven't done this, if I haven't bonded, if I haven't created an incredible attachment, I'm not going to influence behavior, Fido's behavior, and the same is true in parenting. If we try to enforce rules and we haven't created an appropriate bonding, we will promote rebellion. It's rules plus attachment, connection. There's a guy by the name of Urie Bronfenbrenner that a developmental psychologist studied families his most all of his life. Wouldn't you like to know what he concluded after researching family systems for years after years? Listen to this. The most important factor in the development of competence and character, and Steve would add faith, in fact, throughout life, not just in early childhood, is involvement in reciprocal joint activity between people who have an irrational attachment to each other. In other words, two people are crazy about each other. Where do you find that? Well, it's hard to find, except in family. There it's routine. Hey, isn't that great? After a lifetime of research, he says, hey, what do I conclude about families and about child development and child rearing? He says, without a doubt, the most important factor in the fostering of competence and character and faith is this: two people are crazy about each other. There you find it in family interaction. He goes on to say, watch this. In order to develop normally A child requires progressively more complex joint activity with one or more peers? I don't think so. With one or more adults who have an irrational emotional relationship with the child. Somebody's got to be crazy about that child. That's number one, first, last, and always. You're listening to a guy that studied children and families his entire life. And what's he saying? Hey, what's got to be first and foremost is what? This. You got to create an incredible bond, attachment. And I find it interesting that he says, notice he says, joint activities with whom? Adults. You see, peers by definition are a cohort group who have similar levels of cognitive development. They have similar levels of maturation. And he's saying if we really want to foster character competence, and I would add faith, they need to be interacting with those who have a greater maturity. Then they need to be interacting with adults. Listen to me. I think one of the reasons parents have a growing fear of peer influence, I can remember that. I can distinctly remember being at a stage of parenting where I was afraid that his or her peers were having a greater influence than I was. And I think one of the reasons that we have this growing fear of peer influence is that we're allowing our children these days to spend far more time interacting with peers than they do with adults. We're talking family interaction has declined and peer interaction has increased today, and in part we have allowed other institutions, listen to this, schools and recreational leagues to hijack the family calendar and daily routines. Can I say that again? We have allowed other institutions, schools and sports leagues to hijack the family calendar and our daily routines of life where our children primarily interact with us as adults. Scripture says he will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children and the hearts of the children to their fathers. That says to me that children come into this world with the capacity to capture the hearts of their parents, and I suggest to you it says that you parents also have the capacity to capture the hearts of your children. So how do you go about emotional bonding? Let me suggest a few ways of doing that. First, the verbal affirmation of love. You got to say it, and you've got to mean it, and you got to do it often. I remind you of my daughter's early writings, Nobody Loves Me. Look, it's difficult being a parenting today, but her writing reminds me it's also difficult being a child today. It's particularly difficult being a teenager these days. You've got performance pressure, peer pressure, appearance pressure, the longing for belonging. We all want to believe we're worth knowing. It's difficult being a teen these days. And what do we do when we don't feel like we belong? When we don't feel like we're connected? What do we do? What do children do? They misbehave. They misbehave. And so we've got to create this incredible bond. When we say verbal affirmations of love, I'm suggesting to you, yes, it's the power of the spoken word. I'm reminded of the power of the spoken word of a writing from many years ago. This was like World War II. And a father and son, a father was going to the factory in the wee hours of the morning, and he was about to board the train. His son was with him, and his son was leaving in the military to go fight a war. He was 19 years old to go fight a war, and he's having this moment with his father when he's saying his goodbye. He won't see him again. My father had talked about his anger. He didn't want them to take his child, only 19 years old, who had never had a drink or smoked a cigarette, to fight a war in Europe. He placed his hands on my slim shoulders. You be careful, Stephen, and if you ever need anything, write to me, and I'll see that you get it. Suddenly he heard the roar of the approaching train. He held me tightly in his arms, gently kissed me on the cheek. With tear-filled eyes, my father murmured, I love you, my son. Then the train arrived, the doors closed him in, and he disappeared into the night. 1 month later, at the age of 46, my father died. I'm sitting here writing this to you at the age of 76. I've lived through 4 invasions of World War II. I've had a life full of all kinds of experience, but the only memory that lingers is of the night when my dad said, I love you, my son. Wow. You got to say it. You got to mean it. They need to hear it. The power of the spoken word. The second part of that is meaningful touch. We create bonding not only in spoken words, but appropriate and meaningful touch. David Mace says it this way: affection is the single most important ingredient that is blended throughout the many changes produced by time and circumstance. It is the common bond that gives heart and strength to the shared life. What are we talking about? We're talking about the power of meaningful touch. Give me a moment as I correct my sheets here. The power of meaningful touch. Yeah, appropriate, age-appropriate affection. And the third one is bonding experiences. Like, have you ever stopped and thought about who are the people you are closest to? Who are the people that you have this kind of relationship with? How did you come to be so close? How did you come to be bonded with one another? What would be bonding experiences? We're going to say more about this later. But I'm going to suggest to you that the people I'm closest with, watch this, we're going to keep it simple, are the people I laugh with, people I sweat with, and the people I cry with. Can I put it a little different way? The people I'm closest to are the people I play with. We laugh together. They're the people I sweat with. We get down in the trenches and we work together. And the people I cry with, we hurt together. Now, I'm going to challenge you. You think about the people in your life you're closest to. I suspect it's the people you laugh with, you work with, and you hurt with, right? Those are bonding experiences. We're going to say more about that here in just a moment. Number 2. Foundations of a legacy of faith. Involvement. Less time equals less influence. Less time equals less influence. Hey, you've heard that before. The formula is pretty simple, right? And let me see if I can illustrate that. How many of you have gardens? Got any garden people in here? Okay. I could go over to Stan's house and go back there and look at his garden. And I could walk over to his fence and look in his neighbor's backyard, and if his neighbor has a garden, do you think I could tell in a moment who's been putting most time into their garden? Less time equals less influence. I can remember being a CPA in over a number of years, about 15 years, that I took a certain measure of comfort in the idea of spending quality time with my children. I think that was a bit soothing. Hey, I may not have a lot of time, but I spend quality time with my children, and I came to realize that quality time takes place in the context of quantity time. There's some things you just got to be there for it. You got to be there when they hit their first home run. You got to be there when they're tucked in bed at night and they want to know where God comes from. You with me? quality time takes place in the context of quantity time. I like this quote. Oh my. Wow. Hey. Yeah. Hey, that's just the devil's way of saying he doesn't want us having this conversation. All right. Devil's working against us. Look at this quote. You simply can't think efficiency with people. You think effectiveness with people and efficiency with things. I've tried to give 10 minutes of quality time to a child or an employee to solve a problem, only to discover that such efficiency creates new problems and seldom resolves the deepest concerns. Are you with me? Truth of the matter, I pride myself in being highly productive. Alan would tell you that. I had a coworker tell me one time, Steve, you're the most productive person I've ever met. I was like, yep, I'm all the time working. I'm all the time producing, right? And I pride myself in being highly efficient. I want to get the most done in the least amount of time. You know what I mean? The problem is, look at this quote again. You simply can't think efficiency with people. We parents sometimes want parenting to be efficient. We want to get the most done in the least amount of time, and it doesn't work that way. We need to invest. If we're going to create a family legacy of faith, I'm here to tell you it's probably going to take more time. And maybe I should point it at me. It's going to take more time than what I committed to it. Yeah, you're just going to have to up your game in terms of how much time. Look, what this quote is trying to say is you can't think efficiency with people. You think effectiveness with people and efficiency with things. If I have a lawnmower, I'm going to get the self-propel. I'm going to get it where it's efficient. But I'm here to tell you, trying to influence people's lives is not very efficient. It's not very convenient. They call you at inopportune times. They call you at inconvenient times. And the same will be true with your children. It won't be convenient. You've got to be willing to put in the time and be there in order to influence their lives. Does that make sense? I think, yes. When will we realize that we're so powerful that we can't do our own thing without affecting everything and everyone around us? We can't have our cake and eat it too. Now, there's some folks I've witnessed who've seemed to have pulled it off, but not many. I'm here to tell you that if your aim in life is to maximize your income, maximize your portfolio, maximize your possessions, maximize your position at work, there's probably going to be a price to be paid. Smalley's saying it usually affects everything and everyone around us. Can I be a bit transparent here with you? I am highly confident that my strong-willed daughter needed more of her father's time. You see, raising my son, for the most part, was efficient. But I've also discovered he needed more of my time. My life with Alan intersected on a number of fronts, the sports front and activities front. And not so much with my daughter. I'm looking back on it, watch this, I needed to be far more intentional about creating time with her. Let me give you a way of thinking about involvement. What I call individual relationship time. I don't have the time to give you some techniques of that, but you get the idea from the individual relationship time. Sometimes as families we think of always doing things as a group. I'm suggesting to you that if you want to build strong families, you build strong dyads. Do you know what I mean by dyad? Dyad is two. You build strong dyadic relationships, and then guess what? When you come together, you'll be a strong family. Your children, at some level, all of your children want to be an only child, I think. Let me see if I can emphasize the importance of IRT. I like to call it IRT, individual relationship time. Listen to this. This is the story of Blake. You can see the mother's handwriting here is pretty challenging, right? So I won't read the whole thing to you, but I'll try to summarize and read part of it to you. Their 11-year-old son had a brain tumor. They lived in Abilene, Texas. They were traveling this week to Dallas to see all kinds of neuro this, neuro that, doctors and tests and all of that. She says the week seems endless, and yet it is racing by too fast towards a surgery. He was going to have surgery the next Monday. The strain seems unbearable, and yet God gives us the strength to make it through each day. At night, after full days of doctor's offices, we are in great need of happy diversions. We let Blake choose where to eat and where to go, such as the mall, fishing shops, whatever, anything to get a smile on his face. These smiles are precious to us. We may never get to see them again. And then she goes on and describes all the tests. And now they've come back to Abilene. They're driving over Sunday to drop off their other children with the uncle's family and go to the surgery on Monday. On Sunday, we drive to Decatur to leave our other kids with my brother Rick and his wife and their own 4 kids. Rick, watch this, is trying not to cry as he hugs Blake. Rick says, "Sorry, buddy, that this has been such a bad week." Blake looked very surprised by Rick's words and replied, "This was the greatest week of my life. I was an only child. I had mom and dad all to myself." Wow. Out of the mouth of babes. Oh, at some level, every child wants to be an only child, and one of the things you need to do is spend one-on-one time in relationship with each of your children. I remember when I was in Abilene, a family where the father was like 5'6" by 4'2", you know what I mean? And they had triplet boys. And you'd see that father going, and here'd be these 3 boys right there with him. And I promise you, each one of those boys needed a one-on-one relationship with his father. You build strong families by building strong dyadic relationships. If you're an involved parent, you will be an aware parent. You need awareness. I can remember my lovely wife devoted considerable time to being a prayer warrior, and one of her prayers for our children was if they ever got involved in things they shouldn't be involved in, that we would know. And I can remember being at home one evening and the phone rang. It was back in the day where it was on the wall, and I went and answered the phone. And I guess there was such things. Yeah, I guess it was cell phones, because Amy's phone called home. And she was out and about with some other teenagers, and I answered the phone, and I'm standing there listening to her making plans with these other teens. And they're making some plans that I didn't particularly appreciate, and I'm on the phone listening to it. And it's like she had her phone in her pocket, purse, or whatever, and guess what? It phoned home. I'll give God the credit for it. It was an answered prayer. And so I hung up and waited a few minutes and called Amy and said, "Where are you?" "Oh, over here." I'm like, "Well, who you with? What you doing?" "Well," I'm like, "I think you need to come home." Now, yeah, an involved parent will be an aware parent. Listen, these are pretty serious times. I strongly suggest to you that these are perilous times when it comes to parent awareness and supervision of our children. We need to raise the bar, the level of expectations we have on ourselves. I know Christian families that have virtually no boundaries, no controls over the kind of information that's being introduced into the lives of their children through TV and media, through cell phones, and through computers. Man, this is serious conversation, awareness these days. A matter of fact, I like to think of it this way. If you've given your child a device, a cell phone, a computer, and you allow them unsupervised use of it, you have allowed them to enter a spiritual war zone without your protection. That's pretty strong language, but we need to say it. Look at the picture here. It's a picture of a war. What if you had a son or daughter fighting in a war somewhere on a foreign field? I suspect to you would be on pins and needles. You'd be on your knees praying that their platoon comes back today. You'd be sitting there wanting to know the moment they are safe, wouldn't you? And yet we'll give them devices and things that lead them into a spiritual war zone without our protection. We must raise the bar on parental supervision and accountability. If your child tries to say something to you like privacy, that's what a teenager will say. That's what you call rationalizing. You're the adult. You're the one that says, hey, accountability trumps privacy. You with me? For all of us, right? Okay, you with me? Hey, that's serious. Number 3, we're doing 3, all right? The third foundation, we got what? Emotional bonding, we've got involvement, and we've got positive role models. I like this caption. You can't read it. It says the importance they play in our children's development and how to help them to choose wisely. And if you look there on the picture on the right, it illustrates social learning theory, that we are all observational learners. I asked my students, can you tell me what little Caleb has in his hands? And they make some pretty good guesses sometimes. You see him there? And that was Caleb when he was maybe 2 years old. In his perfect weed-eating form. He went out, see, Alan in the background has a weed eater, and Caleb went out and found one of those wands you use for watering flowers that has a shaft and is curved and has a head on it. And what's he doing? He's got perfect form. Bend the knees, hands apart. What's he doing? He's been watching his dad. Yeah, and I'm here to tell you, a 16, soon to be 17-year-old now has his own lawn business, and they still weed eat together. That is social learning. Our children are observational learners, right? They imitate what they see. And look, you're probably their first role model. And I go as far as in a moment here, I'll say if it is to be, it begins with me. Watch these scriptures. One who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. And you know what? The research actually supports that. You take a teenager and show me their closest 4 to 5 friends, and I will have a pretty good idea who your teen is, because that tends to be the case. They will imitate the behaviors of their peer group, cohort group there. Another passage, do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals. Walk with the wise, become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm. Walk with the wise and you'll become wise. Might maybe be the adults in their world. Who do they spend their time with? Are they walking with the wise? Yes, as I said, it may mean our children need to spend more time with adults, those who are wise and of sound judgment, right? Watch this passage. Now flee youthful passions and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace, along with those who call upon the Lord out of a pure heart. Look at that. Flee youthful passions, pursue what? Righteousness, faith, love, and peace. With whom? What's it say? Together with those who call upon the name, together those of the household of faith, those of the community of faith. Scripture is saying your children need to be spending time with those who walk in faith. Hey, positive role models. This is a very old illustration, but I like it, so I'm going to do it anyway. All right? Oh, matter of fact, I left my visual aids out in my car. I didn't even bring them. I'll describe them for you. Some of you are old enough to remember a guy by the name of Dennis Rodman. He played pro basketball, and he was considered a bit of a rebel, and in terms of lifestyle and such. And the visual aids that I had out in the car, I found a book at a garage sale where Dennis was an author. He wrote a book, Bad as I Want to Be, and the I is in gold letters. Bad as I, what a philosophy of life, bad as I want to be. And he's sitting nude on a Harley Davidson motorbike, and he's got some strategically placed basketballs, but it's kind of that message of a rebel, right? Yeah, the Harley, and right? And I'm as bad as I want to be. And so sometime later, I'm sitting in a transmission shop getting some repair work done, and I'm sitting there waiting on my vehicle, and I look over, and here is this magazine, Texas 20, Texas Monthly Magazine. And this one happens to be a special edition. And guess who's on the front cover of the Texas 20, Texas? It's Dennis Rodman. And so I was intrigued by that. And I looked, and here's what it says over there. I'm not sure if you can see it. Tops our list of the most impressive, intriguing, and influential Texan of 1998. And I'm sitting there looking at this thing, and I'm thinking to myself, the most impressive? I don't think so. The most intriguing, perhaps. The most influential Texan? I hope not. I'm like, why not have Barbara Bush or somebody like that on the magazine? And so if I had remembered to bring in my visual aids, not only was he on the magazine, you could go to your family-friendly McDonald's restaurant and buy an item, a drink, and guess what they would give you for your child to take home and put on their shelf? They'd give you a Dennis Rodman cup. Absolutely. I got the cup. I told a student I'd give them an A if they could find me a cup. And they found me 3 or 4 of them on the internet and brought them to me, you know. And so I've got these Dennis Rodman. And I love to hold up on this hand, you got a book, Bad as I Want to Be. And over here, you've got your family-friendly McDonald's restaurant saying, hey, take this home and put it on your shelf. And have you ever heard the basketball phrase, I want to be like Mike? And some of them say, I want to be like Dennis. I'm just saying to you, wow, it is spiritual warfare, the role models that are being held out and introduced into the lives of our children. Therefore, if it is to be, it begins with me. Oh, it's got to begin with you. I like this writing by Edgar Guest. If you haven't noticed, the PowerPoints are being skewed. They're moving things around, but that's okay. I like this writing. I'd rather see a sermon than hear one any day. I'd rather you walk with me than merely point the way. The eye is a more ready pupil than ever was the ear. Good advice is often confusing. Example is always clear. That one's probably worth saying again too, but I'll resist. So can I just give you some illustrations and then try to give Alan a little time here? Let me give you a few illustrations. I like some of those things where children get to write about their parents, and I teach a course on fathering, so I've got some of those. Let me try that first. I have the greatest dad in the world. He is always there for my mom, my brother Joey, my sister Elizabeth, and me. At night time, he reads us books, sings us our favorite songs, and says our prayers. During the week, my brother Joey and I help my dad every night pack 32 bags full of oranges and apples and some snack bars. Then in the morning, my dad goes under Lower Wacker Drive and hands out the bags to the homeless people that live there. I hope when I grow up, I don't only look like my dad, but act like him too. I love my dad. One of my favorites. My dad is a Lampert's man. If you know what a Lampert's man, would you let me know what that is? If there were no Lampert's people, then other people won't have houses, so I assume it's construction. Then people would have to live in the street. My dad is the best dad ever. He taught me to make a wooden airplane. It was the best plane ever. He taught me to make a tree fort. He has a Harley Davidson, and he brings me on motorcycle rides. He is the number one dad. He loves me, and I love him. We are true pals. My dad plays baseball, football, and basketball. My dad's name is Todd. It is fun when he jumps on the trampoline. I like when my dad pretends to fight with me. It is very fun. My dad is awesome. I would kiss a pig for him. My dad is very strong. Yeah. Are you with me? Maybe one more. This one, if you can give me a little time with it. My grandparents were married for over half a century and played their own special game from the time they met each other. The goal of their game was to write the word Smiley, S-H-M-I-L-Y, in a surprise place for the other to find. They took turns leaving Smiley around the house, and as soon as one would discover it, it was the other's time to hide it once more. They dragged Smiley with their fingers through the sugar and flour containers to await whoever was preparing the next meal. They smeared it in the dew on the windows overlooking the patio where my grandma always fed us warm homemade pudding and blue food coloring. Smiley was written in the steam left in the mirror after a hot shower where it would reappear bath after bath. At one point, my grandmother even unrolled an entire roll of toilet paper to leave Smiley on the very last sheet. There was no end to the places Smiley would pop up. Little notes with Smiley scribbled hurriedly were found on dashboards, car seats, taped to steering wheels. The notes were stuffed inside shoes, left under pillows, written in the dust upon the mantel, and traced in the ashes of the fireplace. This mysterious word was as much a part of my grandparents' house as their furniture. It took me a long time before I was able to fully appreciate my grandparents' game. Skepticism has kept me from believing in true love, one that is pure and enduring. However, I never doubted my grandparents' relationship. They had love down pat. It was more than their flirtatious little games. It was a way of life. Their relationship was based on a devotion and passionate affection, which not everyone is lucky enough to experience. Grandma and Grandpa held hands every chance they could. They stole kisses as they bumped into each other in their tiny kitchen. They finished each other's sentences and shared the daily crossword puzzle and word jumble. My grandma whispered to me about how cute my grandpa was, how handsome and old he had grown to be. She claimed that she really knew how to pick 'em. Before every meal, they bowed their heads, gave thanks, marveling at their blessings, wonderful family, good fortune, and other. But there was a dark cloud in my grandparents' life. My grandmother had cancer. The disease had first appeared 10 years earlier. As always, Grandpa was with her every step of the way. He comforted her in their yellow room, painted that way so that she could always be surrounded by sunshine, even when she was too sick to go outside. The cancer was progressing. With the help of a cane, my grandfather's steady hand, they went to church. But my grandmother grew steadily weaker until finally she could not leave the house. For a while, Grandpa would go to church alone. Then one day, what we all dreaded finally happened. Grandma was gone. Smiley. It was scrawled in yellow on the pink ribbons of my grandmother's funeral bouquet. As the crowd thinned and the last mourners turned to leave, my aunts, uncles, cousins, and other family members came forward and gathered around Grandma one last time. Grandpa stepped up to my grandmother's casket and, taking a shaky breath, he began to sing to her. Through his tears and grief, the song came, a deep and throaty lullaby. Shaking with my own sorrow, I will never forget that moment. For I knew that although I couldn't begin to fathom the depth of their love, I had been privileged to witness its unmatched beauty. Smiley, see how much I love you. Oh, grandparents, you're role models for your grandchildren. Hey, let's see if we can give Alan a few minutes here to maybe answer a few questions and make some application of these foundations to creating a family legacy of faith.
All right, you know the routine. Any questions or comments? For reals.
I will say this. I believe session 5 tomorrow, the middle session, will really hone into what you're asking to do. Parents as teachers. Al, you had something to add?
Yeah, my first response is that you see faith less as following a set of guidelines. The Bible is not a rule book on how to get saved. The Bible does include God's wisdom in living in this world, and it does include salvation. But that's not what the Bible is. The Bible is the grand story of God and how he chose to interact with his creation, and how he chose to, the story of how he redeemed them, and he worked with people who would just as rather reject him, right? And so I guess what I think potentially turns off teenagers, and a lot of people, honestly, to Christianity is thinking you just want me to obey and follow a set of rules. No, I'd much actually rather motivate people not out of obedience to God, but receiving God's love. I mean, isn't that the order of how things happen? The Israelites were saved, and then he set up laws that then led to how do you spread God's glory, right? So you got to receive God's love. Can I help you think through? There's no other system, because if you don't have that mindset in place, right, then much of your life and much of relationships become about performance, right? And if I don't perform, I'm less than you. And if I outperform, I'm better than you. Right? One of those creates judgment and oppression. The other one of those creates depression, less than thinking, right? So our relationship with God is not based off of our performance, right? But can we receive his love more and more, and that transforms our heart, right? That we desire to be with him, right? We desire his ways. Other question?
I have a sister, 180 degrees different from you, affect you growing up.
180 degrees what?
Different from you, you're alive, she was strong.
Oh, the merry-go-round and Strongwell child? Yeah, I'm still, I'm about at that place in life where I'm ready to get a tattoo. My sister has a whole sleeve of them. We're like, whoa. Something I'll say kind of to that, kind of that Dennis Rodman point is in part of what our culture has now, we can see all sorts of different lifestyles and different models, and what we see on TV is often that which is flashy and unique. Well, actually, most of life is not flashy. Most of life is rhythms, routines, relationships, responsibilities, right? So that's where I go back to, what story are you betting your child into?
Hey, Alan, can I add maybe right here, specific to that, one thing parents have to be careful of when you have a strong-willed and compliant like that. If you're not careful, the tiger gets the attention. And if you're not careful, you're so consumed with trying to manage the strong-willed that if you're not careful, you neglect. And that's part of the reason why the IRT is so important, is that the compliant child very much needs your attention as well.
My question really was, did you feel like Tiger was getting all of the?
Oh, did I feel like Amy got more attention?
Yeah.
I don't know. There were parts of me that kind of bugged me. They seemed to help her out in other ways that I did not get help. But then again, like, I look back, I didn't really need that as much. Or they met my needs in other ways. I never did my laundry in college. Hey, I have one more quick comment about, do we got time? You mentioned a slide, and it says, in order to develop normally, a child requires progressively more complex joint activity with one or more adults who have an irrational emotional relationship with the child. You didn't expand on what irrational emotional relationship with the child is, but to me, what that means is in a typical adult relationship, or you might think of a marriage or whatnot, there's certain reciprocity. I give and I receive, much like you do investments, right? I give and I expect a return, right? And that's called reciprocity in relationships. But parent-child relationships are not based off of reciprocity. It's parents giving, right? Without expecting return. And I think that's really important. Because you think of God as being the parent. How do I model God as parent? Is God's motivation in having a relationship with us our performance? Right? The Israelite sacrifice was a way, it says that's created an aroma for God, right? So there are things about following God's will, being in God's will, that God is pleased with, but that's not his purpose in having a relationship with us. And if we're not careful, we can communicate to our children, right? I'm disappointed in you. You've upset me because you've done this, right? And we react because we expect a certain return in the relationship. If I'm giving so much to you, then why aren't you giving back to me? And then what that can eventually communicate to children is my relationship and my love for you and the totality of the words that I say to you are largely based off of your performance. When you perform well, I praise you. When you perform poorly, I say that's not good enough. Or however else you might say it, right? So part of what we have to do is, one, our children's behavior is not based off of, our identity as people and as parents is not based off of our children's performance, right? Just because my child fails doesn't mean that I'm a failure, right? It's not to say that there's not expectations, but I'm not expecting my children to be able to give back to me what I put in. That's not how God designed that relationship. I struggled with that at a children's home when we were house parents. There was a girl we were investing a lot in, and it didn't seem like there was much of a return. And I looked at Rachel and I said, what if we just need to start investing in other kids, because she doesn't seem to be listening to us. And Rachel took a step back and she says, Alan, that's not the way to think about it at all. Actually, we need to continue what we're doing. Right? And sure enough, and she changed her life. Right. All right.
Good, all right.
Cool.
For this time. And we just pray that you would help us to make application to our own lives and help us as we do indeed seek to create a family legacy of faith. We ask for your provision. We pray for your Holy Spirit. We pray that you would bless our time together tomorrow, that you would equip us as your instruments for good, indeed, as we try to shapen the character, competence, and faith of our children and grandchildren. It's through Christ we pray these things. Amen.